So, hello, all the ears that are out there to absorb some new information and words and spirit, hopefully. I'm with Dr. Janet Schwartz this morning, who has just finished her third book called Authentic Intelligence, which I think the term is brilliant because I have a concept that for as long as we've been making believe that thinking is reality, we have been thinking artificially about reality. And so artificial intelligence has been largely the accumulation of cultural ideas and norms and standards that humans have developed that have no basis in anything other than thinking, not actually reality.
Yes.
So I love the introduction of the book, How to Use Your Mental, Emotional, and Spiritual Gifts to Create the Life and World You Want. So, as in our conversation, this puts each of us in the driver's seat with the steering wheel to make the decisions that either get us where we think we want to go or don't get us where we're going. And that is an empowerment of the awareness that the choices we make are up to us, and how and what we think are choices we make about thinking. It isn't thinking doing it to us, it's the choices we make. So if we can recognize that, and I think Janet has done a brilliant job of outlining 251 different tips on how to adjust and, I would say, maintain flexibility in the face of changing circumstances that can be overwhelming and can be difficult. But I want to introduce Janet before I speak too much for her, and tell you all that I appreciate her being here and you all listening too. Thank you.
Well, a warm hello to you, Jack, and I am thrilled to be with you and your listeners. And to all of you who are listening, I am Jan Schwartz, and I have essentially lived three lives in one. And what you are going to hear a little bit about today is because of all the growth and all of the merging of thoughts and experiences within my three intelligences, that I'm able to bring this to you, because this is how I made it through so many difficult, uh, knocked down moments it's more than surviving, it's becoming merging into something that I believe is trying to aspire to my best self. So I'm a former elementary teacher that went on to become trained to become a family psychologist. And I work with criminal kids and their families. And when I stepped into Northeast Ohio, I discovered some evidence and some patterns that I knew were not normal. And so I had to draw upon um, my my principles. I wanted desperately to go into private practice. That had been something I had been so eager to do for so long, and I had to let go of that dream and follow my spiritual principles, because I needed to do the right thing and stand up and pound the pavement and gather data. There are long stories behind all of this, but I'm telling you about the moments that were pivotal in my choices, and where I realized that what who I was someone that was deeply anchored, that no matter what, no matter how much hardship, no matter how much dysfunction, no matter how many disappointments, who I am is what's in here. And before long, I had federal people coming, and that side of the table was theirs, and so on and so forth. And that led to, I thought I was going to go and start this family therapy clinic that I dreamed about, but instead, more and more cases came forward, more and more serious engagements and connections with federal authorities and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and so on and so forth. And I realized then they kept looking at me and saying to me, "How are you picking up on all of this?" Because my specialty is money laundering and different stages of money laundering. And they were saying, "How are you doing this?" Because they're looking at my background and my training. And they helped me look at myself. And I would always answer, "Well, I have eyes that see." But it was so much more, because what I was bringing to the platform was a convergence of foundational skills that had been planted in me since I was the smallest child. And so I owe so much to my elementary teachers, who instilled in me a love that was going to resonate throughout my life as my anchor, no matter how much disappointment, no matter what happened. I knew, and based on the purity of the love they gave me, that they enabled me to see that no matter how my family was acting toward me, God was my father. And to me, that was a personal decision of accepting. So there has been constance in my growth and in my path, and I haven't been knocked off no matter how many times they have rejected me, profound rejection. And I say to them, you have to understand where I come from.
Mhm.
And when you come from that pure love, you you get up. And so through everything, I had that spring. And so my faith, which has blended into, the acceptance of, I'm deeply close to Judaism, and I have so many Muslim friends, but what we have in common is the fact that we can choose to live authentically in our lives, and we can take that courageous path, and we'll be rewarded by a peace that no one can knock out of us. And I realize that was a very long introduction of myself, but I'm excited to share so much about what I've learned, and I welcome your thoughts, Jack.
Mention also the organizations within the government that you have helped in the investigation aspect of it, that sort of greater intuitive sense, that knowingness that you brought to it, because I want to make a point about that came out of the first conversation that we had.
Yes, and I'm bringing my list here because it's these connections are extremely important to me. Um, I was invited out to the hide money laundering division of the FBI in Manhattan when I reached out for help, for supervision, because I had this chart in front of me, and here I am in Ohio, and what am I to do? I'm stuck. So I called up, and before I knew it, I was on a plane heading to New York City, and entering a building whose address you might already know. And I was escorted up by people in blue uniforms, and we went up into this small hallway, and they pressed a button, and they said, they gave the man escorting me pressed, the appropriate code, and a very friendly voice came on and said, um, "Hello, Dr. Schwartz. Welcome to the Hide Money Laundering Division of the FBI in Manhattan." You see, I didn't even know where I was. I didn't know I was going there. I thought I was getting some fellow investigator. And something made them realize this lady, whether it was my boldness, whether it was the way I was speaking, but I was a little bit out of the context. I wasn't like a trained law enforcement officer that was coming from some sort of a box. I was coming from this very well-rounded sphere of life experiences already then, and I
Mhm.
also had the passion to be there. So they greeted me with this humor, and he put on the mic, the on the megaphone. "Hey, everybody! The doctor from Ohio is here." So they opened the door, and but you must understand what I looked like. I'm carrying all of this data because these are my heroes. So I'm carrying all of these bags that I disguised in, like, these frump schlumpo bags or whatever, and I'm carrying them over my shoulders and like this. And so he took me into this room, and he unzipped it, and he saw all that I had there, and he said to me, "Jan, I'm getting you coffee." I
So you were on a path that you had developed a theory and didn't know what to do with the theory. Something led you to them.
yes,
And then that led to relations with Homeland Security and the IRS
the
division
CIA,
of
yes,
the
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 CIA,
whole.
Defense Intelligence Agency, the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, U.S. Department of Justice put me on their television network for psychology of white-collar criminals, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. You cannot believe what people will do for a $25 bribe and the number of documents that were stolen or steamed open. On my part, the Ohio Organized Crime Investigations Commission, the Ohio Attorney General's Office, the Governor of Ohio's office, 19 state departments, and various United States attorneys' offices.
So essentially, you're really investigating corruption within society.
Yes,
But what struck me too, before I let you answer it fully, is that you originally talked about it and then also talked about the fact that the people you were investigating were often the authorities. Who I think you mentioned a mayor who was then surrounded by a whole group of people that didn't want the charges forwarded because they had specific relations to other people that were cherished that they didn't want to destroy and dissemble. So the corruption doesn't end or begin with it. The point I was making when you're talking about a spiritual foundation is that morals don't change according to what the interest of the individual may gain or lose. They stay the same based on whatever the circumstances are.
Yeah, precisely.
They're grounded in a morality that does not change because it's an absolute nature. So that's something we talk about in our discussion a lot. And I wanted to bring it to the forefront because obviously you're in the middle of the weeds, but also seeing it from the point of view of someone that they called in for your expertise. And I'm sure within the system, there are plenty of people who are interested in eliminating the corruption that victimizes so many people. And yet at the same time, within that same group, are other people still falling for or being victims to their own inability to reckon with the corruption in their own experience.
Right. And that is why, among so many of my colleagues, there were moments where and I've shared my beginning.
Right.
So you understand what they sensed about me was that I wasn't going to be someone that the next day was going to have a different point of view. I was showing that I was a very stable energy that was pressing forward. I never wanted to be conveying my thoughts or my energy to proceed and make things. I was trying to get everybody to be in the same path where we were it was like tilling the soil, tilling the garden, stepping forward, putting my hand out, fully knowing, having the documents that I had been passed on to authorities where I knew precisely what they were up to, putting my hand out to them and saying good morning, or it's nice to see you again, hoping to bring to them a new energy where they could see that there is a better choice. There is a better life. It's the authentic core. Okay, it's the AI plus, but that's what I was leading them to through every sort of a thing. And precisely, I was someone that when I entered a room, they were not sure how far in I was going to be promoting my thoughts and my energy. And so many began to view me as a threat because there were people who were responding to this different approach to living because they could see that there was a peacefulness about me. And even though I was in the throes of deep, profound rejection, being exiled by the crowd, and I'm someone my whole life who's had a treasure trove of friends and close relationships. So to have everyone step away because I was representing a new way of moving through the world that I inherently knew was so much more full of life and peace and joy that there was a naivety.
Well, I would say that naivety is intelligence. I mean, I think it's interesting that we need to reframe intelligence as authentic when it has never been
Yes.
inauthentic, right? And we've gotten so like love. People say, well, it's unconditional love. I said, well, that's the nature of love. You don't have to repeat. That's redundant to say unconditional love because love is love. It doesn't restrict. It doesn't condemn. It doesn't hold against. It simply offers itself in unlimited. But whatever it is, and it gives it all. It doesn't hold back. So
Yeah.
I think in that you're that corruption you're seeing and I'm seeing is just seemingly part of the human psyche
Yes. Precisely.
that seems to. It's my wife Katie,
Hi,
Janet.
Katie.
Do you hear something beeping? Okay, thanks. Um, if it's something in the human psyche that has been historic, and obviously we have a history of corruption and ideas that have held people suppressed and oppressed and killed people in the name of what they're thinking.
Yeah.
It certainly indicates something unhealthy amongst the species rather than just the governmental agencies, because very often the authorities are protecting things that
Oh,
they're involved in that
oh,
actually are contributing to the
oh,
laundering and all that for their purposes. And we've seen
oh.
that publicly in the last 20 years.
I can attest to that, and I am deeply attached to every agency that has allowed me to share for their curiosity, for their welcoming. But I have had to walk the path and
Right.
had to prove myself. And so there, a colleague of mine says, well, you're put through these tests like this because you're unique and you live in a big way. To me, it feels just like the natural path. So I've had to step back and realize that for me, stepping forward, once I see the pattern and the corruption that belongs here or there, and I call myself a corruption broker at moments because there are times where I say, now listen, there's interest over here. So I don't know who's going to get the bulk of this, but so we have a little fun together. The vets, um, uh, it is such a treasured relationship that I have with them. We use humor a lot, and they have taught me to use humor from that first visit at the FBI money laundering division, HIDA program. But in the way their world works, they're not an independent person who's president of a nonprofit, not-for-fee investigative firm by
Right.
the Forensic Fraud Research. So, and the people, I'm the only face with the firm, but the people that I work with are skilled professionals, local, state, and federal authorities. But none of us gets paid. But what we have in common is that we want to make the world a better place. And we know that it takes a lot of work and navigating to try to remove a corrupt seed that is really altering the landscape in a certain community or a certain neighborhood or a certain state. It takes great, great effort. But you see, they can't independently make that decision.
Right.
There's
They're a
people.
bureaucracy.
Oh, absolutely. So, there are times where we've gotten this far, and then there's times this far, and there's times when they say, Jan, maybe you'd like to become an agent and come in and
But
teach.
at certain levels, it sounds like the individual whose sphere of influence is in charge of the next step may
Yeah.
have people in their ear saying, don't pursue this any further because it may jeopardize some other thing going on in some other agency that's got a bigger or broader view that we think is more. And often those things have historically also been corruptions within the system, looking as though it's solving a problem while it's actually creating the same problem. So it's almost in the same way you're talking about that morality that's
Mm.
indivisible. The corruption seems to also be indivisible within the source of thinking that somehow or another someone's individual or group benefit would trump, not using that name in vain,
Yes.
but maybe would trump the pursuit of actually looking for the corruption any further.
Oh, yes.
That the corruption is almost the exact, it's almost seems to be inherent because
Mhm,
it seems to be as consistent as intuition that might face it
mhm.
and reveal it and thus expose people. And that can be very reactive and very defensive and very, very hyper antagonistic to
Oh,
people.
yes.
They can really get stimulated in ways that are almost death defying, if not corrupt to that point. I'm sure people die in the process of these investigations because of the fact that somebody may be exposed and someone who could be a witness to that all of a sudden becomes eliminated.
Without a doubt. Now you're tapping into all the security incidents, and that is something that I cannot tell you how serious these security incidents are.
Yeah.
I've 9 pages of, I have significant enemies. I don't have any issue bringing that up, but when you people say, "Well, how are you protected?" There must be a force. I know there is a force protecting me, and anyone who moves boldly into the realm of ambiguity and saying somehow we're going to be able to navigate the dysfunction because of the big goal. And my goal is not to destroy the people that are involved in it. First of all, the goal is to help them, first of all, realize.
Redemption. It's
Yeah,
redemption.
my gosh, I made the wrong choice. Let's make this right. And I have said that when I've been in the victim witness area and I've watched the defense attorney go over and pound away to the witnesses, I went right over to him. And I said to him, there's still time to come clean. And the look on his face toward me is like, get out of here. He had such hatred for me. And then the hatred eased into, and see, this is where I learn more about what's within them. The hatred eased into a belief that they have a sorrow they have deeply held within themselves, that they can't make the past right. They won't. Here comes the pride. We're human beings, and our ego and our pride, we either put our energy into our emotional, mental, and spiritual intelligences, or it's going to go into our pride or our ego. But where's our enthusiasm going? But you could just see all of this going on in his face to me. In 5 seconds, it was spinning past. And this was someone that I knew. I had information that every day, every morning, he was going to his priest. I'm assuming, for confession, and then getting right back into it. And my
For
source,
absolution.
yeah, my source for that was his wife.
Yeah.
So,
So what you're almost describing, if I can interrupt,
please.
is the therapeutic relation between a doctor who is sitting with an individual and beginning to allow that individual to look at the nature of the thinking they've been doing that has been haunting them based on ideas that are absolutely not true, but held to be true.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be that same process? Because I know in therapy, there's a lot of reactiveness. People don't show up, they come late. There's processes that sort of indicate their behavior is telling you about their resistance, but their words aren't quite admitting it yet because they haven't formulated the vocabulary to start to announce what they're actually experiencing. And my sense that sorrow you feel that you describe is if we didn't have an absolutely healthy nature, we wouldn't feel that sorrow.
Right.
It would not be so natural for somebody to actually be given the space to say, look, consider what you're doing, rather than being told they have to do it, which then just basically creates more resistance. Say, consider what you're doing. There's always an opportunity to open up and to relieve and to release and to let go. And the nature of love would allow that. The nature of hate wouldn't allow that. And yet, I don't suspect love has anything to do with hate. That's something humans do in the name of a self that isn't really even who they are, but only what they think.
But what we're talking about now, Jack, is since my specialty is white collar organized crime.
Right.
And as you may have, you were hinting at, my involvement in working to transform a white collar organized crime community that works like a corporation. the people view their upward progress in a way that is going to give them the ultimate feeling of security,
Success.
feeling like they belong.
Right.
They're going to be able to say hello to the right people. They're going to be the people. Everyone they see is going to suck up to them. They're going to get special favors, the parking
Right.
attendant, something like this. But in the process of developing into a core member of such an entity, such a white collar organized entity, they sell out on a lot of things and they buy into a whole process of behavioral choices and behavioral descriptors. So, one of the things that a couple of people who did go to prison have shared with me afterwards, uh, and I want you to know that those ex felons, white collar felons, were very proud to talk with me. They're very proud to say to me, "Yeah, that that is that case where that we heard you're working on, that $100,000 went to that committee um, that was going to make that decision in Columbus. Yeah, you were really smart to take that case, and all of your documentation is right. But they're saying that they're proud. They're
Right.
not run. So you see, in order to feel that way and to not feel being ashamed of that, they have bought into a value system that conning and getting away with it means that they're smarter, they're brighter, they're better. So
Right.
they just do everything they can. And then here is what was so compelling in the acknowledgement from these two former these two white collar formerly imprisoned white collar criminals. They said, listen, there's one thing about us and it makes no sense, but once we decide to do something, even though it's not going to work out for our long-term game, we never go back. We never alter our path. So once they're on it, 6 months into it, let's say that someone's deciding to do money laundering through a community website, okay? Once they see that there's some signs around that people are getting wind of that something is awry, that doesn't stop them. They don't pick up on the clues.
Right.
Instead, see, for you, it might be a determined saying, like, wait a minute, this is not a good sign.
And that would be the nature of denial at the root of their thinking, coming to the rescue of pretending what's happening isn't happening so they can continue to act as though nothing's going to happen.
That's right.
And largely that sort of thinking explodes and implodes in people individually. I mean, it leads to severe depression and
Yes.
severe disconnect because the thinking is disconnected from reality. It's not based in the absolute essence of life. It's based in this concoction of what life should be, could be, might be, but never seems to be.
And it's worn as a badge of honor.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well,
the
my sense is self-righteousness is
yeah,
never right.
right.
It's based on wrong trying to be right. And that's basically trying to turn a lie into truth, which has never been accomplished yet. It's impossible.
Yeah. So there are these things that you learn along the way. And as I said, I am a person who has a forever belief in the potential of humanity. So
Yes.
this is how I'm able to go right front line, no matter where it takes, no matter how dangerous it may be, even if someone pulls out a knife and they happen to be a very key person in the community, and his lawyer sitting beside him, and they're pulling it out. He's pulling out the knife, and I'm looking at him thinking, he's telling me he's protecting himself. And what I said to such a person who is so bought into the system, I said to him, you don't need to be afraid of me. I want to raise you up in showing that what you are doing is an exemplary reaction to what has happened. So this is how I try to do my work.
Think about the description you're giving of the individual who becomes ignorant, literally not paying attention to what's actually happening. And I'm going to suggest that within our conversation, the mental obsession conversation, is that the idea that thinking is reality is an addiction. And within addiction, anyone who uses never sees it as the problem, they see it as the solution. So they continue down that same path. Just as you described the mentality that leads to somebody that says, we messed this up, we made a bad decision, but we're all in, we're going forward, we're not going to actually acknowledge the problem would be at putting the entire basis of that thinking at risk.
Yes.
It's exactly what happens when you mention to somebody that they may have a problem with alcohol or drugs. They're very quick to assure you with great confidence that it is not the alcohol and it's not the drugs. It's their circumstances, and it's all justified in this wide web of complicated theories and ideas, all internal to the individual, not literally in mentality, not reality. Thoughts thought to be true, when in fact they're just basically thoughts thinking about thoughts. That limited scope of our absolute potential. And I think the fact that you've broken this down into the mentality and the emotions and spirituality, that's really the holy trinity of the human.
Yeah.
It's really the fullness and the absolute nature that we are all based in. We can't be separate from that, but we can behave like we are because we can think that we are. And that's ultimately, love gives us the freedom to think what we want. The fact that we think wrong is right is a choice we make to feel condemned. We're not condemned by any loving source. It's just a choice. And to pose that to somebody who's acting irresponsibly is the chance to actually notice that responsibility isn't an option. Acting irresponsibly is the option. The nature of nature is responsible. And I think you're describing that in the essence of your own awareness of the job you have is not to kowtow or placate or compromise yourself in your efforts, but maintain the course that's valuable for them. And I wonder, when they were asking to employ you, if some of those people didn't want to bring you into that bureaucracy so they could begin to smother that independence that you have to do that in such a way as to speak to things that would otherwise be unspeakable within the bureaucracy. Because bureaucracies tend to operate just like individuals. They want to start ignoring things by avoiding things and think that that's intelligence, when again, it's just artificial intelligence. It's all made up. And whatever's made up at some point is going to be revealed as false. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, there's an order that has to be kept.
Yeah.
Kept
it's like military.
Yeah, it's yes, and I am a very stable. I love order, but when I'm working with people and I'm in the middle of all of this, we're putting order into it.
Right.
But we're doing it in a way with a creative, intuitive style. And Jack, I love how, all of your words and your summaries and your understanding of what I'm talking about. And I wanted to touch a bit on when you were talking a little bit about hinting at problem solving. And sometimes we get, when you were talking about the shoulda, coulda, wouldas and blaming and not accepting responsibility for the addiction, we find that a lot with embezzlers because they're blaming it on other things. But oftentimes, people who get into these tracks of choosing corruption or choosing, say the entire community is involved in this. Let's say that the community has 2,000 nonprofits, and
Right.
there are how many foundations of Fortune 500 companies that are providing the grants. Okay, so everyone is weaving into the path to be thinking like this. But you see, what they don't understand is that there are other ways to solve their problem about how to succeed, how to bring food home for their table, how to be a contributing member of the community. There's more. There are other ways than following others into corruption. to gain your success. And that's what the three interrelated circles are about. We don't
Mhm.
have to depend upon following the path of we're going to tag on to the kite strings of that person who is now executive director of this or this. I hear they're hiring, so I'm just going to become a little puppet over there. We don't have to do that.
Well, and you mentioned surviving and thriving, which the two are surviving is bare existence. Like nonprofit, you're referring to the nonprofit industry. My sense is that it has largely been used to hide profits, or and very often used to hide profits that are illegally gained. And the illegal work is trying to make crumbs add up to a full meal, a full complement of the abundance that we've been given, the nature that we've been given. And we've abused that nature to the degree that we think of it as something to dominate rather than respect. And notice has a very, very good guidance system that allows it to function beautifully when we're not interfering with it, that would create the abundance we claim doesn't exist, giving the intoxication of the idea that I need to operate in scarce ways to put a few things together for my own self, when in
Right.
fact that never seems to add up for people. There's
Right.
always some sort of, eventually the pinprick of a the pick of a pin pops the bubble, and all of a sudden they're standing there saying, what have I done? What, how did I get here? My sense is that same intoxication is using our body chemicals to give us, using up body chemicals reserved for real survival instincts, real threats, by an
Mhm.
imposed threat that is nothing more than one we're making up in our own thinking.
Yes. Yes, it is. Our obsessions have become such a well-rehearsed coping mechanism to deal with all of the pressure, all of the dysfunction, all of the ambiguity, all tests. You see, everything is a test.
And would you say the ambiguity is really the attempt to keep secret what is otherwise very, very plain to see?
Yes, but not everyone has developed the capacity and the shoulders
Yeah.
to hold a life filled with this many problems, this much awareness that they think a human being typically thinks they can only handle this much. If we were to say, I like thinking about the personality having 12 components. And those of us who've had lives that were very challenging, and within ourselves, we said, never, ever let anyone write the ending to our story. We then kept developing another piece of the personality pie. And with each great challenge, and as you know, Jack, suffering and challenges of great upheaval don't come to some. It's not if we're going to have a time of suffering. It's a matter of preparing for when. And
Mhm.
so just understanding and to my to your listeners who are in their young 20s, I'm taking a deep breath because a part of me wants to not throw so much out there when they're dealing with so much unaware of the awareness about the state of the world now, and my heart breaks for them because it's a lot to absorb right now. Having said that, there are ways to handle the despair of every morning, realizing that yet another area of life has been is broken. Oh my goodness, not that too. And
Mhm.
we had even forgotten about that sphere of life. What I'm suggesting is that in the ambiguity, in facing the dysfunction, we're growing more and more unsafe. And the human being, we don't like to feel unsafe. We try to find ways to feel safe, even if it's a temporary safety. And maybe that goes on to a sense of temporary belonging. However, there is a way to keep yourself grounded where there is a source of safety, a source of growing ability, where you can develop the growing sense of holding the awareness of how broken the world is, that you can face the day with, perhaps in the beginning, all right, well, I'm a little tepid about this. It's kind of lukewarm, but let's give it a try. So we think about feeding until our intelligences, our mental intelligence, our emotional intelligence, our spiritual intelligence. If we do this repeatedly in our family, in our organizations, and it doesn't have to be something that's even discussed. It's just for the leadership to know that the best offering you have for your membership, you have for your family, you have for your congregation, you have for your employees, is to find ways to feed your mental intelligence, your emotional intelligence, your spiritual intelligence. And why? Because we as human beings are wired to utilize our treasure of intelligences. And as we do, and as we courageously, slowly at first, start facing life with a small degree and a larger degree of willingness to become more aware, we all of a sudden realize that we're growing in a sense of being capable.
Well, and the disability of addiction is imagining it's the only thing we can do.
Yes.
That's one of the conditions. And my sense is it comes from the idea that I have nothing to do. The world is difficult, so I can't control that. So I have nothing to do with that.
Right.
When in fact, if I'm intimately a part of it, that
Yes.
decision is in direct contrast and conflict with it. So if I think I have nothing to do with it, then I think I have nothing to do with what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And then I think there's nothing I can do about it. And then the next thing I think is the only thing I can do is to continue to do the thing just as you described. I'm on the wrong path. I just can only continue. That's all. That's my only choice. When in fact, choice always, as a principle, as you're talking about principled living,
Yes.
always allows not to be chosen. That's the whole point of choice. It isn't a choice if there's no other choice. And yet we use that as a twisted form
Yeah.
of language to try and justify, once again, to wrap it in a story that it's the only thing we can do. What's interesting too, that in reading through your list, and I mean, it was 20 pages, something like that, 17 pages of detailed points that the book expands on. And one of the things I think you did that was very interesting, there wasn't a lot of repetition in that. It was very consistent and but the one thing that kept coming up was creative cooking over and over and over again. And I thought, what we're talking about in mentality is food for thought.
Oh, I like
If if I get to choose the quality of the thinking I'm doing, it's going to be nourishing if it has quality. And
that.
I'm going to be nourished mentally, and I'm going to feel more fulfilled and less likely to want to hide and want to do things I think need to be secret and want to do things that I'm afraid to expose. I'm not going to want to do those things because naturally I'd want to share it. Why? Because we're already sharing it. It's all the nature of nature. It's already part of what's happening. It's a much more aligned approach. But food for thought gives me the mental stability to continue in the direction of capability because the functional capacity begins to be realized by actually functioning on the basis of principles rather than this conflicted idea that my truth is alone in my thinking and I am against the world and need to convince everybody else to go along with me or hide from them for the sake of potentially being caught. So I wanted to hear about two things: creative cooking, and another thing, being in Los Angeles that you mentioned, was the allure of LA's psychological topography.
Oh, yes. How about this? Um, let's start with that, your last point. The allure of LA is that ideas are welcomed.
Yeah.
Uh, they The LA Weekly did an article on me that just took my breath away, because what they saw in me was someone who was moving through the world differently. And rather than wanting to hold me back, here's the difference, okay? In LA, they don't want to hold you back because you have different ideas.
Right.
They want to look at this. So there's that natural affinity of wanting to tap into that creative, intuitive energy zone. And there's no burnout there. That's the most wonderful thing, is that once you get there, when you're in creative cooking, now I'm going to go into that, it's the
Yeah.
same thing. It's a new idea. It's a new
Yeah.
idea. And where is it going to lead? I believe that the answers to our greatest challenges, our greatest problems in life, are right in front of us. And someone's going to get there if they keep tapping into that creative, intuitive zone. So all of the researchers, all of the brilliant scientists that are exploring, testing in the laboratories, they're all there in the creative, intuitive. Okay, the creative cooking is something that we can step back from our problems and say, okay, I'm going to take an approach to chicken noodle soup that's a little different. I'm going to use, instead, what can I use? I'm going to use Cornish hens. Let's do something, let's do a take on something that is an American classic, okay? And the feeling of having decided to bring in a new ingredient into something that's a part of every American household, for someone like me, because my heart wants to be in every home. This is a path. I couldn't mean this more. I have been given the ability to develop and cultivate a love within. There is a thriving love that is within me that fuels me. And so this path that has come from this book is something that I hope to have with every person, not just listening, but in every home, that will give them the strength, no matter how broken they feel, no matter how disappointed they are in how their life turned out, no matter how angry they are that they believed in someone and they were betrayed. These
Or
are,
something,
right?
or something within their own experience
Yes, that
that
just
they find
show.
unforgivable in their own experience and are
Yes,
beating and abusing that idea they have of self.
yes, that is the worst, being angry at the self.
Yeah.
And it takes longer to get over the anger at the self, but it is a part of our journey to do that. Because in the end, we all need to come to terms with the fact that we're not perfect. That is something that we all have a moment of realizing, and we say, it's okay. It's okay. From here on, from here on, I have a new way, and it's going to be a better way. Because why? Never, ever let anyone write the ending to your story. We always can tap into that creative, intuitive energy field that is so open to every one of us.
Well, then I would suggest it's because it's ever present and it's omniscient and it's omnipotent, omnipotent. It's always available. And the only difference is whether I choose to reach for it and actually express it. It isn't because it comes and goes, it's because my thinking about it comes and goes. And that is the defining difference in making believe that what I am is what I think, rather than what I am is that absolute knowing nature that doesn't change. That's the essence of it, because it seems to be the thing at the bottom of the announcement I sent you, or a bunch of things about near-death experiences and people who have had this witness of something profoundly different than they expected. And when they knew they were coming back into their body, they were very resistant. They didn't
Yes,
they didn't avoid death. They were avoiding going back into the human experience because
yes,
that experience had been so imbued with fear and such. So one other thing that has occurred to me over the years is that, because you're talking about the guidance system, how do we are we going to confront things honestly, or are we going to continue to make believe they're just what we think they are? Effectively, is what I'm hearing you say. And my sense is that the circumstances we face, that seeming challenges, or life's curriculum, like we're in a class in college, we've just gotten there, and to be there on the first day with the textbook you've never opened and see what the professor's writing on the chalkboard and making believe we already understand it and know it isn't going to lead to any learning.
Yeah.
The circumstances are actually life's terms, life's curriculum that I haven't bothered to learn yet. They're really giving me that chance in perfect order,
Yes.
regardless of how disheveled, dissembled, disassociated, complex they seem. All they are is a chance to begin to witness the thinking I'm doing about what's happening that doesn't have much to do with what's happening at all, but everything to do with what I make believe is happening. And start to notice that I'm literally coming to terms with my spiritual knowingness that has absolutely, you said it earlier, absolute clarity.
Yes.
It's not a muddy glass. It's not something where it's a lens of absolute perfect clarity that has that awareness even possible. If we were wrong at the basis of our existence, wrong would feel right. It would feel happy. It would feel great. People wouldn't feel depressed, conflicted, anxious. They would be open arms and say, bring it on. I can't wait. But
Right.
it's that deny. In my experience, whenever I face these things, I begin to realize this is my denial. This is the limits of my denial being exposed. And how willing am I to actually notice the learning potential of this moment by just taking a deep breath and rather than try to get over it and change it and fight it, simply
Yeah.
have it. Have it. I've learned that I can't let go of anything that I don't think I have, and I can't let go of anything that I don't have, and I won't let go of anything that I don't think I don't have, because I'm bent on claiming it in some way as a definition of my experience rather than seeing that it's just a thought I have that is fighting for its survival when in fact I'm the one that I think I'm that thought and my life depends on maintaining it, which isn't true.
Which isn't
It's a
true.
real openness.
Yeah.
And I would say intuition is really that wisdom, the wisdom of the circumstances to know exactly what we need because it's an exact reflection of that projection, trying to escape. It's actually giving us a mirror's image so that understanding becomes the other way of seeing things we can't see visibly.
And I call that authentic intelligence or AI.
Yes, I
And
love
that's
that term.
it's because it is from the most authentic source. And it's not going to let you down.
Yeah.
And learning to trust that comes with, step by step. We get through one hurdle, we overcome. That's what we do in life. That's what human beings are here to do, to overcome. And with the overcoming, once we overcome, the blessings just unfold. The opportunities of connectedness, life gets more rich. Just because there's a problem doesn't mean that things you're now going to be having a lesser existence. It is just trusting that the opportunity you've been expected to deal with. And that's really the energy behind the task that each one of us gets when we get us all of a sudden realize we're in the throes of a new situation. The expectation is the situation is put on a platter to us saying, okay, here, how how are you going to carve this? How are you going to deal how are you going to create this into a wonderful Thanksgiving meal on this platter? So it's rather than thinking, oh my goodness, I can't manage this. If we using the three interrelated circles, if we immediately realize, wait a minute, I don't have to go back to that way of facing a cumbersome situation. I have a new path. I have a new pattern to follow. And that is feed your mental intelligence, feed your emotional intelligence, feed your spiritual intelligence. And you keep doing that while you are managing and dealing with whatever tasks are a part of the challenging scenario that you're facing. And you're going to we as human beings begin to feel a new sense of confidence because not only is this a proven way, not only is this something that there's no burnout, it is, and this is the greatest joy, is that once we start doing this, we want to go back into it all the more.
Mhm.
Not it's It's not like, okay, all right, I'll try it. It's a new way. I have to do this. It is no.
One direction is
Today,
impossibly hard because it's impossible, and the other one is so simple as to not require any effort whatsoever.
right.
It's a knowing that knows. It isn't thinking, it isn't a process, it's just a state of being that we're aware of. And I would say that's the ultimate state of who we are, the essence of that love, and the opportunity to actually express it is always available. My experience is the present is always new, which means that everything that's always possible is always presently possible. And if I make believe it isn't, that has nothing to do with reality and what's possible. That has to do with what I'm thinking. And if I'm thinking something that isn't real and thinking it's real, that's delusional. And that's really the root of addiction is insanity. And the idea that all of a sudden it becomes something I need to get over has me trying constantly to feel better about it rather than coming to terms with the fact that there isn't anything there other than what I'm making of it. And that's the facing of it, my experience, and saying, wow, I am once again creating a delusion that I make believe is true. And in sitting with it, literally just talking about it openly, I've watched people, the guy you described in the witness or in the witness stand whose face was sort of spinning. I've
Yeah.
watched that cycle just end. And all of a sudden they either cry or laugh because the release is palpable and the awareness is profound. And given the history we have, my experience that human history has been written based on this idea that we're constantly at odds and somebody's trying to be in charge of other people and demand of them things they don't want to do and claim by doing that they're really in charge and they're real power. That is not power at all. It's actually weakness and vulnerability and complete absolute insanity to impose that on other people and wonder why people in power build huge castles to protect themselves from their own people. And they've done it through history. If that is our awareness, if it's natural, coming to terms with it is simply beginning to concede. It's always going to feel awkward. It's always going to feel conflicted. And that's the actual effect I'm given as an understanding level, being able to see that effect is actually telling me I'm up to something that isn't right, being thought of as right. I'm talking openly about it, beginning to actually express it and say, I do it whenever I feel conflicted. I know what the conflict is. Something I'm thinking. I don't even have to know what it is to know that I'm doing it. And what I've realized is that what is happening is not as important as that it is happening. If I start to say, oh, it's happening, I feel the disturbance, of course, I'm maintaining a thought that I think is real that isn't real. My sense is brains do not tolerate or process insanity well because it's like flooring your car in neutral and wondering why you're not getting anywhere and wondering why the engine keeps breaking down.
Right.
It's just operating at full speed with not in gear. There's no direction. There's no forward motion. There's no actual alignment with that channel, that absolute moving movement of the moment to the moment.
Thoughts are meant to be connected. Mental intelligence is meant to be connected to the
it's
emotion
aligned.
And to the spiritual intelligence for the best performance and best functioning. But we have to catch ourselves and learning about ourselves and having the courage to say, to get to know ourselves that way and to eventually have the trust in a simple formula that costs nothing. It's a mindset that will begin in everyone's heart that wants to have a new experience in living. It's morning. Are you ready to begin anew? Are you listening to the birds chirping? Are you hearing the school bus coming down the street? Are you hearing the wind and the leaves and the branches swaying into the windows? The day is new. How will you step into it? And so every day, some people say it takes courage to face each day. It does. It takes great courage when we're grieving. It takes great courage when we're facing the realities of what's at stake in our world and in our country, it's very hard. But what we can do, each one of us, because it's collectively that we can answer the call. It is one on one. Begin anew. And then you take it from there.
Well, and courage, like responsibility, tends to be natural when I'm not thinking discouraging thoughts. Because discouraging is literally trying to have hope in hopeless ideas and faith in faithless ideas and trust in untrustworthy ideas, except for one thing: they're going to cause misery. They're going to cause conflict. They're going to cause anxiety and stress and depression. Those things are guaranteed. It's interesting that we can bet on something that's absolutely guaranteed and then not want to claim we have anything to do with it. In Las Vegas, that would never happen. Everybody would celebrate the win, but we know better. We know better enough to notice this is not our nature, to know it's something we want to try to fix and get over and try to feel better about. And my sense is addiction is trying to feel better about it all the time because we know something's worse. What would we be feeling better about if we didn't know something was worse?
Right. And addiction can be to so many things.
Everything.
Right. So it's growing accustomed to choosing that one same coping mechanism, that one same way of doing things. Now, I have to qualify that our coffee maker broke the other morning, and not having coffee was quite a disturbance for me. So I'm not coming from any place of self-righteousness. I have my own patterns of, oh my goodness, this is how I like to begin the day. In a way, it's pampering, and we can call it whatever it is, but rituals, traditions of how we begin the day. But what I'm talking about is the energy of how we as people of light, people who are created, people who are children of God, each one of us is a child of God. No matter what faith we are, we're going to see ourselves as a child of God. So how do we begin our day? How do we begin anew after a disappointment? How do we face a day in a world where there is so much ambiguity and so much devastation and so much that's wrong? We begin by saying, what can I do within myself? What can I do within my family? What can I do within my organization? And we feed our treasure of intelligences and have the courage to begin.
It's really authentic reliance and authentic dependence on what is reliable and dependable, not in a negative, derogatory, conflicted, upsetting, disturbing way, but in a way that is not just good for the individual, but all individuals. Starting to see that the nature of that thriving is to do things that everyone can benefit by, rather than do some things that are good for me. And I think now I'm better than everyone else, rather than just based on simply having a thought and basically having a corrupt thought that I think I'm taking a little bit for me and I'm the winner. It's actually creating. Alan Watts wrote a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, and he said basically everything humans do to try to secure themselves is exactly what's creating the insecurity they're trying to overcome. And he's talking about addiction being the natural, this sort of mental source that he wasn't referring to it that way, but I think it's been referred through. Buddha said, he didn't say life is suffering. He said attachment to desire in life causes suffering. That's an addiction he was referring to. This idea, my sense is that ultimate addiction is the mentality, the thought that a thought thinking of itself becomes a self, gives me the opinion I'm the creator now of reality, and everybody else better abide by my dictates because I am threatened. And why would I be threatened if I had any security whatsoever? If the thought was pure and whole, there is no threat, there is no risk, there is no vulnerability whatsoever. That's the courage isn't even courage. It's just a natural, honest expression of what we know to be rather than what we think is what we know. That transition of actually getting beyond the thinking of knowing, but the knowing of knowing that doesn't change.
When we get into the obsessions that are that deep and that interwoven, then we have to realize that what we're also tapping into there is we're trying to feed our ego.
I think it's the creation of the ego. I think that whole idea that my thinking of itself creates myself is the ego, which is a false image. And all it is thinking about thinking. It isn't thinking about me. So the more, and that's based in fear, because I know it can't be true, because I know reality is reality. If reality is reality and I'm of reality, I would know reality. I don't have to think I know it to know it. But the ego becomes clearly a false-filled, hate-filled, abusive, doubt-filled. It's sort of the embodiment, per se, of an image of all those things that would not be parts of love. They would not be integrated in real life, but imposed and induced within a mental state and a narrative that seems to make sense because we keep repeating the story and developing it as time goes by.
And someone may say, okay, Jan and Jack, well, how are we to raise our teenagers at a time of social media? And your theory of the three circles is fine and all of that, but we still have to live within the construct of the way the world is working. The great thing is that you can bring this whole energy of feeding your intelligences, your mental, your emotional and spiritual intelligence into your posts on social media. You're just going to be an example of what it's like to be an authentic human being in an artificial world, because you're going to be showing that your character, your spirit of willingness to be generous in spirit to your friends, to encourage your friends, to care about your friends, to wish the best for another person, even though they got the job and you didn't. Or even if it's reverse prejudice, that has happened too. I've had two situations where I did not have the right skin color, and that was devastating. So people say, well, why do you still stay? Why are you still engaged with that entity that passed you by because of that? Well, that was just part of my situation. That has nothing to do with the work that I do or in the direction that my work is going. See, so it's this model of the three interrelated circles weaves through everything, but never does it shatter the core.
Right.
Someone else
And
may
that
say, someone else
the
may say,
interest
I say you gather bitterness if when you get knocked down or you're told I'm sorry, but we can't have someone with blonde hair and wears heels and dresses be in charge of a group of people like this. We can't. It just doesn't work for our agency. Okay.
well, pretty soon they'll be doing skin changes. You just get a whole new suit,
There.
whole new bodysuit, like Al Jolson. What's interesting, in this idea of perfection, because you're talking about an ideal doesn't change. Principles don't change. They're fundamental to existence. So they don't change at all. They're always present. They're always here. They're always available. They're always ever ready. They're always generous. They're always given. Principles that aren't principled, like within that irrational thinking, are always taking. They're never giving. They're always afraid. They're in that construct is literally a delusion. I mean, it's just an idea that we have that is true when in fact it has no truth in it at all. When it comes to perfection, if that ideal is ideal, then there must be an essence. If the essence of a non-changing absolute nature is our essence, that wouldn't be a changing nature. So that's why it's simple. So it doesn't take a lot of effort or a lot of effectiveness. It becomes incredibly effective with very little effort. becomes very efficient with very little effort because it's just nature functioning on the basis that the entire universe is functioning on.
It's a whole new way of moving through the world, because this is how we are to move through the world. And this is
It's,
how we're going to get realigned.
I would suggest we've been moving through it that way the whole time, while we have simply been addicted to thinking we're not. And just like the individual who doesn't notice things going wrong so they can continue to maintain the path as though it's the right path,
Yeah.
we've all collectively been participating in that to some degree, to any degree, that we've been maintaining ideas as reality rather than notice that reality does not need our thinking to be real. It was certainly reality well before humans ever even existed.
Yes.
And start to think of it that way. Perfection is also interesting on this idea. If the absolute nature of nature is absolute, then there are absolute principles like responsibility, which is the ability to respond rather than a reactive, automated, numbing agent of fighting and denying and defensiveness and defiance and all that. And if those exist, then the opposite of those things are also the same thing. Whereas in our relative world, the opposite of something, the opposite of love would be hate. In the absolute world, the opposite of love is still love because it doesn't change. And within the context of perfection, if you compare something to itself, it's perfect, which is really beginning to allow things to simply be as they are and notice that they've always been as they are, regardless of what I thought. And that thinking has always run afoul somewhat of making believe that things are only what we think they are. And when we do that with people, we obviously miss great swaths of who they are, which often has them say, you don't see me. You're not hearing me. You're not listening to me, because we're actually listening from the point of view of what I think I'm seeing and hearing rather than what's actually happening, which again is a pretty good definition of insanity, seeing and hearing things that aren't happening. So perfection is within the relative experience we're having. If things are allowed to be what they are, they become perfect, whatever their frailties and failures are. Part of those frailties and failures become their perfection because they aren't trying to achieve something, but actually just represent how things are right now in the present.
In the
The
present.
morning when we wake up, if everything's how it is and I start remembering that everything's how it is, it's a lot easier day to face than when I think it should be something other than it is, while it is what it is. And having that internal interbulation constantly being grinding down literally my physical systems, my bodily systems are being worn down by that stress I'm creating by constantly thinking things shouldn't be how they are, or thinking I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, or I shouldn't be where I am, and all those other kind of thoughts that create internal conflict.
Solid. You've been sorting through a lot of thoughts, combing through them.
Well, and I think to your point, Janet, there's this whole idea that the absolute nature is the absolute nature, that there is a loving absolute source. And if
Yeah.
that is our source, to act in ways that aren't aligned should cause disturbances as a guidance system, like a dashboard flashing a light that something's wrong.
Yes.
And those feelings are our emotions are telling us what we are. They're actually sort of the guidance system of the deeper sense of thinking that we're doing that isn't limited to simply the words that we use. It's a greater sense of knowing in our emotions. We get upset. We feel disturbed. We even talk about it in words, but we're referencing something that's always much deeper than the words, just like this profound nature of life and love would be well beyond any words we could ever define it by. But we can also point to it and reference it and actually know it by simply suggesting it, rather than thinking we need to be the creators of it or understand it in every way that it is, rather than say it is what it is right now, to even be having the conversation we're sharing.
Right. That by putting ourselves in the driver's seat of all of that thought, we're circumventing the task.
Within thinking, we think we are. Yeah. Yeah.
We're,
And I suspect that's the circular notion of addiction, that it just keeps feeding and feeding and feeding. We call it self-centered thought and self-centeredness. And my sense is it's thinking that within the thinking about thinking, there's a
yeah,
self-centered. when in fact, all that's centered is more thinking, which is the mental obsession. This obsession of thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking is creating more thoughts. It isn't creating a better self or a better me or you. It's creating an idea, trying to achieve an idea of something we've already got, which is the insane part. If we've already got it, we're trying to strive for it. That makes no sense whatsoever. We must have deep beliefs in what we're doing in terms of thinking to be able to continue doing that while we actually have a knowing awareness that's never changed.
And my sense is that for those deep thinkers such as you and others who might be listening, is that we've learned to be that way. And it didn't start yesterday.
Right.
And it started a long time ago. And somehow it was fueled into being a stronger way of security for stepping into the world and managing the ups and downs of dreams fulfilled, dreams misplaced, dreams rebuilt. And the talking can fill the heart, or we try to have it.
In my sense is, while we might think of it in the past, the present is in fact the culmination of every thought that's ever been had and every action that's ever occurred. And we are witness to the totality of it now, which is the place those decisions can be made. So to feel hopeless about it is to pretend that where we are is the place that we can't be or don't need to be, and think it's some other place that we never seem to find or get to. And
Right.
humans have been seeking a long time to find the place that it seems we've always been in.
Yes.
We've always been present. We've always been here. We've always been able, and we have disabled our
Yes.
own functional capacity by not, I call functional literacy, reading the body language, and
Yes.
starting to see that we're not very good readers of it when we think of it as something that we shouldn't be doing, rather than saying, if we're doing it, it might be worth admitting we're doing it first and sitting with it for at least a breath and starting to say, this makes no sense to do that. At least begin to concede the most elementary awareness that we know it doesn't make any sense before launching into the next action that keeps us distracted terminally or seemingly terminally in this obsessive, compulsive, reactive state.
And my suggestion that as we as human beings begin to read ourselves and see that, okay, we're getting into that spiral of
Right.
thought, is to say, okay, stop. This is a great moment for me to feed my other intelligences,
Yeah.
because the more thought you have, you're in the mental intelligence, okay, and that's wonderful. But to unstick yourself from that, the best thing for us to do is to then focus on feeding our emotional intelligence by saying, okay, what can I learn about myself? Self-awareness. How can I regulate myself better with my anger, my emotions, with my tolerance of my frustration or my ability to handle differences? Self-awareness, self-regulation, as you try to unstick from the thought. Find ways to get motivated about a new pursuit that gets you unstuck from thoughts. What motivates you? What motivates your dreams? What motivates how you want to be with your family, how you want to be in your community? What ideas? These things, just by starting self-awareness, self-regulation, thinking about what motivates you, going on to thinking about, all right, I'm on a roll here now. How can I increase my empathy, my feelings for others, for our spouses, our children in the family, our community, the next door neighbor. What can I do to increase my ability? We sometimes hear people say, well, walk in their shoes. Well, there are many ways that we can grow with our empathy, but the next thing I'm going to suggest to get unstuck from when the spiral is going and going and going, and you're trying, even though you know that you've gotten to the bottom of it, another thought comes in that's even smarter than the last one, and this is one of the features of the of having a great intelligence, Jack. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, this is one of the things that has to be managed and dealt with. So a great way and a fun way uh, to further emotional intelligence, to unstick, is to think about how you want to become more skilled in social situations. How to have such a comfort level that you could go to whatever organization and feel like you belong there. Maybe the Native Americans are having a function. Maybe the African American community is having a function. Maybe you can go there. Increase, maybe you want to go to uh, a new restaurant in your area and look at who's there and decide which table of people here would you like to send over a dessert for, just for a little surprise. Creating a new interaction with new people. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and I think what you're describing is the principled nature of freedom, meaning we're always flexible, we're always able to adjust, we are always free to do what we think, and it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do something that isn't contemptible. So that freedom actually allows us, if we were only supposed to feel good, we would be condemned to that. And real freedom is allowing us to notice that good is based on bad, that navigational ability we have to make the choices as you're describing is part of our nature. It means that we are never stuck, but only stuck to the thought we think
Right.
is stuck. And I think that's exactly what Buddha said with attachment. And I think that's a good definition of addiction that I think has been recognized through history, but not called out as the mental process that's sort of infected at the core when we make believe our own thoughts and conclusions are reality. That has put humans against humans for as long as humans have written history. And it does not need to continue any more than, as you're describing, someone needs to sit with the opinion there's nothing else they can do. Because all the possibilities, if they're possible, are possible, surprisingly. And the
Right.
only impossibility is making believe that they're not. It isn't because they're not impossible, it's because I have a belief in something that I
Right.
think is the only possibility. That's the lie. That's the nature of lying at the root of this mental problem and conflict. And it's a choice, which is the sicker thing, that we would make choices based on something so sick as to kill us naturally, wear our bodies out earlier than they would otherwise wear out, die younger, and even lead to suicide. Suicide is at an all-time rate right now.
I know.
And
It is.
it brings me back to one other question too, within your concept of corruption. What do you think the major source of that money that is being hidden is coming from?
Uh, uh, well, gambling, addiction. You know, gambling is the number one addiction in the world, as far as my sources have taught me. Um,
Bigger than drugs.
Probably it's very close at this point, but years ago it was a pervasive matter. I think that with oxycodone and the pain
Right.
killers have altered the horizon a bit. But interestingly, now all of a sudden, it's just all dropped. So who was fueling it? Who are the
Well,
people?
actually, though, what's dropped is that they've used a new commercial drug to keep people from overdosing with the Narcanon, with I think fentanyl and those things. There was a significant drop, but they've actually just created a new drug to treat the
No.
effect, while it gives the most of the users now on the street have the Narcanon so they can continue to use. So it hasn't treated the addiction, it's treated the effect, which I would say is typically the common mistake about addiction. It's not trying to stop it, it's noticing how it's being started that really turns the table for people when they begin to notice that they're the ones starting it. But to your point, I find it interesting. I thought you were going to say drugs right away because I think drugs are sort of the party drug. Everything is about feeling better and all that kind of stuff. And think of the mayhem and the misery that comes from that, that most people don't ever witness, but are absolutely a part of, including, I would say, my own experience. If I'm participating at a level where my influence hasn't been sufficient enough to help people notice what's happening accurately, then I am absolutely a part of something that is causing great misery to many, many people well beyond the scope of my imagination, because it would include everything that's happening as a result of that dysfunctional behavior. And my sense is, and I think you even hit it better, I haven't even verbalized this, I don't think, but gambling is that risk. It's the constant risk of making believe that a gamble is going to pay off
Yes,
when in fact it is a guaranteed source of failure.
right.
And if the promise is broken, the promise is failure. It isn't the hope, it isn't the wishes. It happens occasionally, but that occasional happening is used to suggest that everybody should become a winner, when in fact very few ever do in that regard. And the interesting thing there is that if you read about the people who've gotten the big lottery things, it's largely destroyed families
Right.
because they don't know what to do with it, and everybody wants some of it, and it's just overwhelming to all of a sudden have this resource that nobody could have predicted or expected, and all of a sudden also have the wherewithal to manage it in a way that's responsible.
There, I find, I know when you're mentioning these things, there are so many levels of
Yeah,
the gambling. And the people who are a part of 12-step groups who are gamblers that try to legitimize themselves by taking on projects wherein they're still gambling, even
yeah,
though they're taking on another project. But I also find a new pattern in that so many people are supplementing their income by sports betting.
right,
That now has become so what may start as a little sport, um, it fuels um, the false hope that this could be a forever way to draw in income and not take on responsibility for their personal growth and contribute. It's a hidden it's a hidden life.
thank you. And yet it's obvious too. The
Yeah.
effects are obvious. The telltale signs are all well within view. And my experience, just as you pointed out about the individual going down that path and not wanting to change their mind once they start, is that what I'm really learning is how to deny better the actual effects while maintaining better the death wish that I've basically decided is my reality, is my goal, is my hope in the future. And I would say that's a very terrifying present traumatic syndrome that is causing great grief in people who become very reactive and do things that are even beyond their own imagination, that are violent and completely. I mean, how many times have we had people say recently, I didn't even know the kid had a gun. I didn't even know he was angry. I didn't know he seemed like such a nice guy. And all of a sudden they've just killed 8 people at an elementary school for some crazy reason. And my sense is we're at a point, within sobriety, there's a point called a bottom.
Hmm.
And my experience is that when people decide to stop digging, like you were talking about the guy in the witness stand or the guy you were talking to, when people actually come to terms with what they're doing, they've basically decided to stop digging any further their own grave. That depth that they think truth is deep, but truth is not deep at all. It's superficial and absolute, always available. What's deep is the feeling we have that we've been disconnected and apart from so long that we're getting further and further from the truth, which can't be possible if it's infinite. And yet, within the confines of the thinking, seems to be the only possibility. And that's a pretty depressing place to get, a pretty alone place to get. But it isn't real. It's again delusional. It's just an idea. So I want to thank you for today, and I want to continue with you. I want to also suggest I've got a woman coming tomorrow that I've worked with for a year or so. And when I went north for my daughter's memorial after I spoke at a men's retreat, on the way, I had dinner with the two of them, and I met her daughter for the first time, who's 16. And she had been listening to the podcast next to her mother while her mother was listening and had the most incredible insights. And I said to her, I said, most adults don't get what you're saying. And she said, really? And I said, no, because they got a lot of baggage. They got a lot of investment and years and years and years of making believe that who they think they are is who they are. And she was sort of surprised. But you mentioned the bitterness earlier. My suspicion is I have the potential, just as anyone, to become bitter when I refuse to ripen and become matured by actually growing in the face of the problems that exist and talking about them and my failures, because I fail regularly. Normally, on any given day, I'm largely failing. But if it's leading to a learning that becomes valuable, it becomes so natural to start noticing that if there's one way for things to be right, every other way is wrong. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong interminably. It simply means it's a chance to correct, a chance to adjust, a chance to do exactly what you're doing. Take a moment to say, what else can I do here? Am I absolutely committed? And that wouldn't be possible if we were not free. It wouldn't be possible if we didn't have an absolute nature. The possibility would only be to repeat what we've done, just like an animal tends to do. They're always looking for food. The food for thought that we have is really the ultimate nourishment of well-being that we are capable of, having given the contemplative advantage to even think of our thinking, and yet we've turned it upside down in this absolutely derogatory, caustic idea that all we are is what we think, rather than know that we have a knowing awareness that we've always known, or we wouldn't have been grieving and mourning our own existence if we didn't know it. It wouldn't happen. So.
And I would just say, what a joy it has been with you, but there is no failing for you because we reframe it.
Yes.
We just say, that was the moment, and I have the next moment to respond to it differently. So we don't have to label that.
And that really reveals that goodness is at the nature of our experience, and rightness, and wholeness, and usefulness, and functional ability. It's all at the nature. Those other things, those seeming failures are momentary glimpses of a thought I'm maintaining. And I've got a lot of them. Culturally, there's a lot of them. Like you talk about history, we are basically we are the inheritance. We have the inheritance of all the ideas that have been collected. And a lot of them we make believe are true because we never even bothered to notice we were thinking them. And my sense is that most of what I struggle with are thoughts I don't even think I'm thinking. And if that's the case, I've been acting ignorantly to what's obvious for a long time. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's real. It simply means I've been engaged in that same disconnected thought formation that gave me opinions that I thought were informed, when in fact it was just another opinion of an idea of an idea of an idea that wasn't true. So you have done an excellent job reading through your I guess I would call it a synopsis of the book. Give everybody the name of the book again, too.
Authentic Intelligence, how to use your mental, emotional, and spiritual gifts to create the life and world you want.
And it is just being published, is that right?
What we're doing now is we're building my author profile. And there were 89 well-entitied individuals, and such as yourself, podcast host, media, various 89 requests for a pre-publication copy of the book. What comes next is what my deepest hope is to be compared with a book agent who believes in the concept and will lead me to a publisher that will want to find ways to get this simple way of living into the hands of every family and every individual. That's my
Beautiful.
hope. That's my hope. Thank you.
Well, that would be a #1 seller,
Oh,
which would be a very close bet to the idea of everyone having it. And really reinforcing this is really giving everybody, my sense is we're being given what we already have, but are finally coming to terms. We're waking up to the havingness of it, the beingness of it. And
believe
that is a beautiful thing to participate at any level. And to realize also that everybody's affected. If somebody's bailing water on a boat, everybody rises with the boat that's in it.
it's the gift. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to help a broken world.
Yeah.
I want
If you would send me the synopsis you sent to the people, I'm going to use that as the introduction so that people can read through exactly what you did in relation to this podcast, so, or what you provided other people. Anything you have that would be a preferred bio of the book and what you're doing right now would be great. And thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you to everyone listening. Until
Loved
next
you.
time. Love you too.
Yeah. We can do this again, by the way.
Very good.
Thank you.
I look forward to it. Bye-bye.